Good evening, everybody. It is Friday, that Friday feeling, May the 5th, the 5th of the 5th. And it is class number 8 out of 8. P1, Governance, Risk and Ethics for the June 2016 sitting. Because yes, the exams are but 5 weeks away. So we're almost there. Final class, and we've just got the last 2 chapters of the notes to get through, which is the ethics, but not just ethics, it's the ethics and then going on and developing the stakeholder theory stuff that we introduced at the end of corporate governance. You remember we said corporate governance, agency theory, best interests of shareholders, and then at the end we expand it and say, ooh, but maybe it's additional stakeholders as well. Well, we need to develop that theme a bit further, but as I said, we've also got some ethics to look at. So that is our plan for the evening, to get to the end. Wouldn't that be nice? We also have, therefore, our final mentoring session left to do. That is happening on Tuesday, the 8th of May next week at 5:15. And my plan for that half-an-hour session, as well as answering any queries anyone might have, is I'm going to take a look at a case study question. Probably possibly a smaller question first as well, just to warm ourselves up, just so we can start thinking more about exam technique and putting this knowledge we've got, that we've been looking at, into practice in advance of revision, which is not that far away. Okay, well, we have stuff to get through, so let's make sure we get through it, shall we? Chapter 12 and chapter 13. And there we, oh no we don't, now we do. There, haha, we have chapter 12, Ethical Theory and Professionalism. When this exam was first launched in December 2007, almost 10 years ago, would you believe it? It was not called Governance, Risk and Ethics. It was called The Professional Accountant, and it was all aimed about being a professional type of person. The syllabus was pretty much the same as it is now. But there is an element of the course that looks at what is professionalism. We have ethics, as you can see, and the ACCA's ethical code. One of the 5 fundamental principles is we are meant to behave professionally. And we need to understand what that means and why it's so important that we should behave professionally. Now, of course, ethics is a topic that you have seen before on other exam papers as you head towards P1, most notably F8, of course. And there are some bits of this, but not as many as you would like, that you have seen before. But in chapter number 12, instead of saying, here's ethics, this is what it is, which is what F8 does, we're not going to tell you what the ethics is. We're instead going to look at how we decide what ethics is. We're going to be a bit philosophical, question it a bit. Now, whenever I get to the start of chapter 12, I feel I should give you a little bit of a warning. Don't get scared by that concept. Up until now, the P1 course has got a lot of common sense, a lot of words that you would use in normal everyday language, and that helps to make it a very accessible paper. There's nothing too technically scary in here. Now we get to ethics. Because ethics has been around for a very long time, some of the words associated with ethics have also been around a very long time, and they are not, I suspect, some of them, the sort of words that you use in everyday language. Don't let the long, funny words put you off. The theories behind the long, funny words are absolutely fine. So before we open up chapter 12, yes, that one. Before we open up chapter 12, let me tell you that when we look at what is ethics, or right and wrong if you prefer, it basically divides down into 2 schools of thought, for this course at least. Because one way to look at ethics is that ethics is a set of fixed rules, right and wrong, and that these therefore always apply. And if you are a member of a religious group, for example, you might recognise this sort of argument. Now, I am no expert on religion, so I'll do my best not to offend anyone who is. But if we take a simple example, the 10 Commandments in the Bible say here are 10 rules as to how you must run your life. There is not a little note at the bottom that says, oh, exceptions, in the following circumstances you can break these rules. They're just rules. So that's one way of looking at ethics. A set of rules, we should all abide by them, no exceptions, nice and simple. A different approach, though, is to say, no, 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 it depends. Whether something is right or wrong is not look it up in a rule book, it depends. Now, whichever of these two concepts you feel you agree to, or agree with even, doesn't really matter, because this is not an exam checking your personal viewpoint. You need to appreciate that there are some people on the planet who think there's a set of ethical rules, and there are other people on the planet who think it depends, and you need to be able to explain the logic behind each of their thoughts. Whichever one you agree with is up to you. Okay, now if you get that, let me tell you what's coming up in the notes in chapter 12. Because one way to define a set of fixed rules is to call it absolutism. I did warn you, some long words were coming. Now, in fact, if you go back through past exam questions, your examiner has also called this being dogmatic. It depends is called relativism. But again, your examiner has interchanged the word pragmatic. So that's the first bit done. But there is a very specific example of absolutism and an example of relativism that we also need to look at. And one example of an absolutist is a deontologist. And one example of a relativist is called a teleologist. So that is what we need to start the evening looking at. And just to prove to you I'm not making this up, here is the beginning of chapter 12, absolutism and relativism. As you can see down at the bottom of the page, absolutism, set of principles which are non-negotiable. Relativist, flexible, depends on situation. And in fact, if we just do that, you'll see teleological and deontological coming up over the page. Okay, just before we get into the deontology and teleology, a little bit more on the absolutism and the relativism. An absolutist believes that if we just had a set of rules that everybody followed all of the time, no exceptions, the world would be a better place. And you can sort of see some logic behind that, because if nobody ever killed anybody else, the world would be a slightly nicer place to walk around in. If everybody always told the truth, we'd all know where we stood, wouldn't we? We might hear some things we didn't really want to hear, but at least we'd all know. We would have total transparency, wouldn't we? A relativist will say, yeah, well, that's all lovely, but look at something like, is it ethical to not let women have the vote? Because if you go back 200 years, women did not have the vote. And not that many people seems that concerned with it. Now women do have the vote. Men and women are considered equal. Well, trust me, that's a fairly recent phenomenon. So that might suggest that something which is considered unethical today, stopping some people having the vote, was considered ethical at some point in the past. In other words, ethics can change over time, perhaps. And there's also the fact, as we've said more than once on the course, culture differs around the world. And what is ethical and considered right or wrong in one country might not be considered right or wrong in another country. So maybe it depends on geography as well. So that's what a relativist will say. An absolutist will say, no, some countries and cultures have simply got it wrong, and they need to be educated. Difficult. So let's get down to the more specific ones. Deontology and teleology. A deontologist believes that everybody should follow a fixed set of rules, and the reason they think that is the first four letters of that word. Because deon means duty. So the idea is that a deontologist believes that we should all follow a fixed set of rules out of some sort of calling, a sense of duty. As I've already mentioned, you might get that sense of calling from a religion that you follow. I suppose if you really are a loyal employee, it might come from your employer and a feeling that you must do whatever's right for the company. Now that makes deontology a fairly simple concept for the exam. You will follow the rules all of the time, the end. Teleology is a little more complicated. A teleologist believes that an act is ethical, and any act can be ethical if it is aimed at achieving a good outcome or a good consequence, if you like. This is because these four letters here mean end. It's all about the ends. The ends justify the means. If you get a good result, then however you got there is fine by us. Now, because it's about ends, consequences, results, teleologists are sometimes referred to by a word that is probably easier for you in the exam, which is a consequentialist. Although not easy to say, it seems. Now, deontology seems relatively straightforward. There's a set of rules, you follow the rules. Teleology, a bit more complicated. An act is ethical if it's aimed at achieving a good outcome. And that raises two fairly big questions. How do you know in advance what the outcome will be? So you're going to try to get a good outcome, but of course you might end up with a bad one. And the second issue is, when we say a good outcome for who? Let's explore that idea a bit more. Well, I suppose the simplest way of looking at it is let's all focus on doing things that create good outcomes for ourselves. However, that is rather a narrow approach and could be described as being a bit selfish. It has a name. It is called egoism. The opposite end of the spectrum is any act is ethical if it produces a good outcome for society. You would like to make the world a better place. You wish to act in the public interest. Ooh, you corporate citizen, you. Well, that's wonderful, isn't it? Well done, you. Trying to make the world a better place. You can't argue with that. And that makes you a utilitarian. Now, I think most of us would agree that the utilitarian thing over on the other side of the screen is lovely. Wouldn't it be great if everyone on this planet was trying to make the world a better place? Utilitarian utopia. Fantastic. But is it actually possible to please everybody? Make everybody a winner? I doubt it is it? And that's why maybe, just maybe, we need to accept that getting all the way to the far end of that is probably impossible. Wonderful if you want to try. And maybe there's a sort of compromise position in the middle, where you don't just selfishly look after yourself, you aim at trying to do the best thing for society, but maybe you should look at the best outcomes or act in the best interests of at least your key stakeholders. And as long as you focus on your key stakeholders, maybe that is the best we can expect from you. You may have to explain absolutism, relativism. You may have to explain deontology, teleology. And deontology, teleology, as you can see, has a fair bit of explanation to it, especially the teleologist. But as well as explaining them, you might be asked to justify something from a deontologist's viewpoint, or justify something from a teleologist's viewpoint. Not difficult, you just speak like a deontologist. Why do you think you should do this? Because everybody should do this, because that is the only ethical way of behaving, and if everyone did that, the world would be a better place. You, teleologist, how will you decide what to do there? Well, I will be outcome driven. I will try to predict what will happen, the consequences of each of the various options I have, and I will aim at whatever produces the best consequences for society if I can, but at least for my best stakeholders. So you may be asked to adopt the personality of one of these types of thinkers. And to do that, you need to understand it so you can say the right sort of things. Okay, so that was teleology and deontology. We move swiftly on from there to another bit of theory, if you like. And this bit of theory even is by a guy called Kohlberg. And what Kohlberg looked at is how people make a decision to do something. Okay, what's the point of looking at this then? Well, actually, this is one of the most useful things on the entire course. Because if you know how someone's brain works, how their mind works, what makes them tick, it's a lot easier to persuade them to do something. And if you're in a leadership position and you have to persuade fellow managers or staff to do something, or if you're an industry regulator and you're trying to persuade company directors even to do something, this could be rather useful. Let's have a look at it. Kohlberg decided, based on research, that people fall into one of three basic categories when it comes to how they make decisions. The first category is called pre-conventional. The second category is called conventional. And the geniuses amongst you will no doubt have worked out that if those are the first two, the third one is bound to be called post-conventional. Pre, of course, means before, post means after. So there's an element of time frame involved in this. It doesn't have to work like this, but Kohlberg's view is that we start our lives pre-conventional. What does that mean? It means you don't yet know what society's normal behaviours are. You haven't learned yet. You don't know what ethics is. We gradually become conventional as we learn what society's expectations and normal behaviours are. And then at some point in the future, some of us, not all of us, question society's norms and say, actually, I'm not so sure that that is the way we should behave. So, pre-conventional, don't yet know or accept society's norms. Conventional, accept and follow society's norms. Post-conventional, challenge society's norms. Ooh, get you rebel. Now, Kohlberg actually then split each of these three up into two subsets and said we start as pre-conventional. Well, how do you decide how to behave if you've got no ethics to go by? You avoid bad things, or punishment, if you like. You realise that pain and being told off is not very nice, so you try and avoid it. You then realise over time that as well as avoiding punishment, it is possible to earn rewards. So, for example, a small child will soon realise that some things make their parents tell them off, and they don't like being told off, so hopefully they stop doing it. They also realise as a small child that if they can make mummy or daddy laugh or smile, that often gets them a cuddle and maybe gets them a sweet, and so they'll do things to try and make their parents happy. This is all fairly basic behaviour. Then, as we get a little bit older, we start to follow norms. Now, when you're relatively young, you don't necessarily know what society's norms are, but you follow your friends, your peers, as we might call them. So your friends when you're younger, maybe the people who live in your town, you go off to university, you follow your friends there. You get a job, you start doing what your colleagues do, and eventually that turns into following society. But some people get to a point in their lives, some sooner rather than later, where they say, hang on a minute, I'm going to live life by your own rules. Make it up for yourself. And if you believe that those rules are better than what current society does, you might try to persuade society to adopt your rules. You want to change society. Now, a sort of people who want to change society tend to start new religions and try and convert everyone to their way of thinking, or start political parties to convert people to their way of thinking. And of course, not everybody does that. So pretty much everyone ends up at conventional at some point. Whether they end up at post-conventional is another matter. Now, I appreciate not everybody will have seen the following television programme, but quite a few of you will have done. And if you haven't, you might want to go and watch an episode or two to make this make sense. If you have seen The Simpsons, who do we know who wishes to avoid punishment and try to earn rewards? And the answer is Bart. Well, he is a child, and rather scarily, his dad. Homer Simpson's life is spent trying to avoid Marge finding out, his wife, and trying to get another beer or another donut. Who is conventional in The Simpsons? Well, most of the time, Marge Simpson, who believes that her job in life is to be the all-American mom, looking after the kids, doing the washing, feeding everybody, and making sure her husband has a meal on the table, even if he is acting like a moron. The only slightly odd thing about the way The Simpsons works is the post-conventional person who challenges society is a child. And that's little Lisa. Now, if you've not watched The Simpsons, don't worry too much about that. But the point is this. If you know that company directors are pre-conventional, they run their lives trying to avoid being punished and earning rewards, how do you get company directors to do corporate governance? Simple. You make it the law and you punish them if they don't do it. A bit like Sarbanes-Oxley in America. Or alternatively, I suppose, you reward those companies who follow it the best. If you think company directors are conventional and follow the pack, how do you get them to do corporate governance? Simple. You tell them that everyone else is already doing it at other companies. It is the norm. Didn't you realise everyone has an audit committee? And then they'll do it because everyone else does it. If you believe that company directors are post-conventional, how do you get them to do good corporate governance? Well, you need them to make the decision to do it themselves. You can't tell them to do it. What you do is you educate them on what good corporate governance involves, and then you let them decide that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Now, it's often said in life, isn't it, that when you're negotiating with someone else, get them to make the decision they want to do, what you want them to do, and they're far more likely to do it because they own the decision. So there we have it. Kohlberg, pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. You may have to explain that on exam day. But rather like deontology and teleology, you may also need to say something as if you were pre-conventional, conventional, or post-conventional, or more likely read through the story and decide whether certain people in the story are acting and talking pre-conventionally, conventionally, or post-conventionally. If someone says, oh, but if we do that, the share price will go down, They sound like they're worried about punishment. Oh, we should do that, our bonus will go up. Sounds like they want reward. They're pre-conventional. If someone says, well, we really ought to do that because that would follow the accounting standard, they're being conventional. Everybody else in the industry does it, so we should do it. Conventional. If someone uses the words, I don't care what, then it sounds to me like they don't care what other people think and they want to make their own rules. Post-conventional. So if you understand this, it's not difficult to spot. And I suspect that with both Deontology Teleology and Kohlberg, you would like them to come up. Because both of them would need to have a fair number of marks attached to them to allow you to explain it all, and applying it to a story should not be difficult if you understand it. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? Right, back to the notes we go again. Goodbye, Kohlberg. We now move on to another bit of theory, and this one has been examined regularly over the years on P1. Gray, Owen and Adams are three professors at universities in Scotland, if my memory is correct. Haven't checked recently. Just to be pedantic, it is Gray with an A, but not to worry. Gray, Owen and Adams, instead of coming up with their own theories on corporate social responsibility, have gone and looked around the world of academia at all the various theories out there. And what they've tried to do is this. They've surveyed the world to find out what are the possible answers to should companies do corporate social responsibility, i.e., should they care about other stakeholders in addition to shareholders. So they've gone and looked at all the theories to find out what possible answers exist to this question. Now you might look at a question, should someone do something, and say there's only two possible answers, yes and no. Well, Gray, Owen and Adams have gone and looked at this and said, well, yes, but there are different reasons behind the yes and the no. And it goes like this. Should companies care about other stakeholders? Answer number one, absolutely not. Companies should only care about shareholders. Why is this? Because it's your fiduciary duty, which, by the way, is set out in law. It is their company. And in case you didn't need reminding, the shareholders employed you, the directors. And I'm guessing they employed you to run the company for them, not for anybody else. In fact, any time or money spent on other stakeholders, according to this view, amounts to theft of shareholder funds. Strong stuff. And this view is known as being a pristine capitalist. So if you're reading a story and someone is talking in that sort of language, they are a pristine capitalist. Should companies care about anybody except the shareholders? The second answer is a maybe. Because it depends. It can be yes, but only if caring about them increases shareholder value. So, for example, should, excuse me, the staff would like a Christmas party. Should we pay for a Christmas party for our staff? A pristine capitalist would say no. That is theft of shareholder funds. If they want a party, they can pay for it themselves. The second one would say, I don't know, let's have a look at this. If we give them a Christmas party, that's going to cost money. On the other hand, the fact that they're getting a party may well motivate them to work a bit harder, be more productive, and we may increase production levels so much that we more than cover the cost of the party, which means this party has become profitable for shareholders. So I don't care about my employee welfare, but if they work harder with this party, fine, let's do it. And that view is called being expedient, or efficient, if you like. So no caring for other stakeholders, you still care about shareholders only. The logic with expedience is that sometimes caring, or being seen to care, pays. Number 3, should we care about other stakeholders? Yes. If society expects our company to care. This is the view of the social contractarian, who believes there is a social contract in place, that if you wish to operate in a society and make profit from it, and as a company own assets, then that's fine. But if you want to operate in that society and get the protection of that society's laws, you have got to do what society expects in return. And if they want CSR, you do CSR. If they get bored with looking after the environment and being nice to your customers and say they don't need that anymore, fine, don't have to do it anymore. So again, number 3, like number 2, is not saying you should care. It's saying if other people care, then you're going to have to follow that. Number 4, should companies care about other stakeholders? Yes. If your company can improve society or reduce damage to the environment, then it should. If it can, it should. Linked into this is the concept that if your company is creating the damage, it can improve society or the environment by stopping creating that damage. Now this is an interesting idea because this logic says we can't expect every company to make the world a better place. Not every company is in a position to improve society, reduce environmental pollution. I mean, if you're not polluting, you can't reduce pollution yourself, can you? You could try and persuade other companies, I guess. This is really targeted at bigger companies and saying, look, big multinational companies can create big multinational improvements if they want to. This is the argument of social ecology. And in many respects, the fifth stage of Gray, Owen and Adams, or the fifth position of Gray, Owen and Adams, feels like the end, because we started with the pristine capitalist. Answer number 5, should companies care about other stakeholders, is a very simple yes. But this time, because society should come before profit. And that is the view of the socialist. So the social ecologist says companies are free to make profit. We're okay with that. But if they can use that profit to improve society, they should do. A socialist says if a company is making profits, but that company does not do anything beneficial for society, that company should not exist. Society first. If you're doing something useful for society, we'll let you make a profit. We turn the argument around. So we have gone from the capitalist to the socialist, from one extreme to the other, you might think, but no. There are 2 more positions. And these get a little more radical. Should companies care about others not just making money for shareholders? Position 6 says, yes, they should. But companies cannot do it. Why? Because they behave in too much of a masculine way. For example, they are too competitive, too aggressive. So what's the logic behind this then? If this is true, and you follow this view, if this is true, the only reason that companies are looking after the environment, trying to be nice to customers, suppliers, employees, local community, is because they are trying to do it better than their competitors are. They're trying to do it for strategic advantage. They're trying to do it to make more money. And because of that, they'll end up doing things which are not necessarily that environmentally positive or socially beneficial. Instead, they'll do whatever looks the best, whatever they can advertise the most, to say to their competitors, ha, well, you did that, look what we've done, yay. So, because their heart is in the wrong place, they'll end up doing the wrong things. Whereas if they were more caring, cooperative, community focused, that is the sort of thought you need to be socially responsible. These are the views of the radical feminist, who says that if business was more feminine, more caring, cooperative, community focused, then you'd get more corporate social responsibility. I'll give you an example. Let's imagine one of our competitor colleges phoned me up right now and said, Paul, help. We've got a problem. We've just had a flood in our college, which means we won't be able to use it for the next week for any classes. And we've got exams coming up in June and no way of teaching our students. Paul, is there anything you can do to help us out? The radical feminist will assume that I, because I am in business and therefore masculine, not because I'm a man, but because business is masculine, will say in response to this other college, oh, your building's flooded. You can't run classes for your students. Ha 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 ha! Bad luck. See ya. Whereas the feminine approach would be to say, that's terrible. Your students won't get courses. Oh, that's awful. Well, I'll tell you what, let me have a look at our timetable next week. Let me see how many empty classrooms we've got. Feel free to bring them over here. Now, if you think about it, there's a lot of logic to doing this. If we go back to stage 2, an expedient, you may well say the reason for doing this is because we could then advertise afterwards, we helped this other college out, which would make us look good. And also in practical terms, if we help them out, if we're ever stuck and we phone them up, we can say, come on, we helped you out, and they'll help us out. Might get us out of a bind. The radical feminists would say, who cares if you ever need them to help you? Helping is what humans should do. That is socially responsible. And finally, the last stage. Should companies care about anybody except their shareholders? The last stage pretty much says pointless question. Yes, no, who cares? Doesn't matter. So what should we write? Yes, but companies won't. Because in the world of business, money comes first. In other words, if the money could be spent elsewhere, it will be. Because the business world only cares about money. So if money is a little bit tight, the first thing companies will drop is recycling, that anti-pollution thing we're doing. We won't give our staff a pay rise this year. In fact, we'll cut their pay. We'll start paying our suppliers later. We'll charge our customers more. We'll give them less product for the same money, because that's what business does. Social responsibility will only ever be done by business when they've got a bit of spare cash because times are good. It's a luxury. It will get cut like that. But it goes further. And these guys, who are called deep ecologists or deep greens, love that idea, are quite extreme in their views, because these guys believe that as accountants, we are propping up a business world, a system where money overrides all social and environmental concerns. And how are we propping this up? Because our focus is on accounting systems, accounting standards, and audit of the finances. We are part of the problem, according to the deep ecologist. And the only way you're going to get proper corporate social responsibility is if companies don't focus on making profits first. They should focus on everything in one go. A deep ecologist would quite happily say the world should get rid of money. We'd be a lot better off if we got rid of the whole concept of money and stopped trying to have bigger houses, faster cars, wearing more expensive watches and jewellery, wearing nicer clothes, and instead focus on making sure that everybody on the planet has a roof over their head, enough food to eat, and that would be a much more satisfying existence. Well, that's told us, hasn't it? What they're saying is, as accountants, We live by the wrong values. We are too driven by the world of finance. And what we should do is focus our obvious professional skills and abilities on social and environmental issues, and rather less on where the debits and the credits go. We need to expand our values, change our values. Well, that's all a bit deep, isn't it? So that is Gray, Owen and Adams, and rather like the previous two things, Deontology Teleology, Kohlberg, Preconventional, Conventional, Post-Conventional, you might get a question that says, argue the case as a pristine capitalist, argue the case as a social contractarian, which means you need to understand those 7 positions so that you can explain them, but also so that you can behave like one of them. Now that is going to take a bit of thought, a lot of understanding, and a fair bit of practice. You have been warned. Now, I'll come back to the professionalism bit in a minute. I talked about values just now and how the deep ecologist feels we should expand on them. That is what that's getting at the end of the chapter. Okay, that's that bit. But we'll come back here and look at the bit I just bypassed, professionalism. As we'll see in the final chapter after break in our final bit of the course tonight. The Code of Ethics of the ACCA has got 5 fundamental principles. Remember, PICO, professional behaviour, integrity, confidentiality, competence and due care, and objectivity. 5 of them. So what is professional behaviour then? Well, as with everything, it's set out in the notes, but as with everything, I think it's more engaging for you if we think about this up on a screen. What is a profession? We have the legal profession, the accounting profession. What are the similarities between them? They tend to have standards to follow. They require skills and experience before you can join, and there is a barrier to entry. To make sure that only those people who have those skills and experience can call themselves a member of that profession. And being a professional, you tend to get rather more respect in society than people who aren't professionals. Nice to know, isn't it? When you finish qualifying as an accountant, some people will look up to you and say, "Oh, accountant." And that means that society wants to trust us in some respects. The good news, of course, is that as a result of all of this, you are likely to get paid more than the average non-professional. Nice. So presumably, being a professional involves being a member of a profession and following those standards. But it also means do not damage society or the profession you belong to, because if the profession needs to have the respect of society, if you damage the profession, you will damage that respect. And maybe as professionals, we also need to try to improve society. In other words, we should always strive to act in the public interest. And that creates a potential problem. A dilemma, if you will. Because as professionals, we don't tend to exist on our own. We also work for companies. If you are a professional, your loyalty should be to the ACCA and society's best interests. If you are employed by a company, you're meant to have some loyalty to your employer's best interests. Which raises the question, what if your boss tells you to do something which he or she says is best for the company, and you're looking at it and going, this does not follow the standards of my profession? Simple example, they tell you to account for something the wrong way. They tell you to ignore the fact that someone's being naughty. They bribe you to turn the other way and ignore what's going on. Well, if this comes up in the real world, it's a very difficult situation. You want to do the right thing, but your boss is standing there and you don't really want to lose your job. This is not the real world, this is exam world. In exam world, you don't do it. You stick to your principles. If that means losing your job, fine, lose your job. You can then sue for wrongful dismissal because you were doing the right thing all along. Get compensation. That will also highlight and bring into the public sphere what this company was doing that was naughty. And transparency says the world should know if they're naughty. Easy to say on paper, isn't it? In the real world, I'm sure plenty of accountants are doing naughty things because it's a lot easier than going public with it and refusing to do what their boss says. So this should be the winner every time. Okay, well that is professionalism. Talked about the public interest there, making the world a better place. And it is very important that we are trusted by society. The world of accountancy sees itself as an essential part of a functioning society. No accountants and auditors means no one trusts the numbers coming out of companies, meaning no one invests, meaning growth reduces, meaning we're all a lot less wealthy, we're all a lot less supplied with the goods and services we need. So accountants and auditors are an essential part of a healthy, thriving society. So we must protect accountancy and work for the good of the planet. Now that takes us to the end of chapter 12, which means we have just one chapter left. What a relief. Ethical decision making and the environment. We will take a short break at that point, I think. As before, please do not get concerned because the program will switch off for a few seconds. I will then start it up again, and we will start again in approximately 5 or 6 minutes' time. I'll see you then.